You don't belong here. Get up and leave before you embarrass yourself. Professor Richard Whitmore hurled the words at the young black woman in the back row, then grabbed her competition badge off the desk and threw it to the floor. This is Harvard, not a charity. People like you don't solve problems, you clean up after those who do. He crushed the badge under his shoe as 500 students laughed. Now get out! But Amara Johnson bent down, picked up her broken badge, and looked him dead in the eye. Because in 90 seconds, this arrogant man was going to discover she'd found the mistake 500 Harvard minds missed. Before we go any further, if you believe talent can come from anywhere, no matter where a person was born, take 1 second right now and subscribe to this channel. Follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens to Amara will stay with you long after it's over. And do me one small favor. Leave a comment and tell me the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning had started with a security guard's hand on Amara Johnson's shoulder. She had walked through the tall doors of Harvard's mathematics building at 7:40 in the morning, an old backpack over one shoulder, a second-hand jacket zipped to her chin, and a folded competition pass gripped tight in her right hand. She had barely taken 10 steps into the marble lobby when a heavy voice called out behind her. Ma'am, hold on a second." She stopped and turned. The guard was already walking toward her, one hand raised, his eyes moving over her jacket, her sneakers, her backpack. "Can I help you find something?" he asked. "I'm here for the mathematics challenge," Amara said quietly. "The public competition. There's a registration table on the second floor." The guard tilted his head. "The cleaning entrance is around the back. If you're here for the morning shift, you'll want to check in with facilities." Amara felt the heat climb up the back of her neck. She had felt this exact feeling 100 times before. She kept her voice steady. "I'm not here to clean. I'm here to compete." The guard blinked. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he let out a short, awkward laugh, the kind people make when they've said something they can't take back. "Oh, right. Of course. Can I see your pass?" She held it out to him. He looked at it for a long time, longer than he needed to, as if the paper itself might be a mistake. Then he handed it back. "Second floor," he said. "Elevators on the left." "Thank you," Amara said, and she walked past him without another word. She had promised her mother she would not cry today. She had promised herself. But standing in that elevator, watching the floor numbers climb, she pressed her lips together and breathed in through her nose until the sting behind her eyes went away. Her mother's voice came to her the way it always did in these moments. "The world may not open the door for you, baby, but that doesn't mean you stop knocking." She had knocked on a lot of doors, and almost every one of them had stayed shut. When the elevator opened, the noise of the second floor rushed in. Students in pressed shirts and expensive sweaters stood in tight circles, laughing, comparing notes, quoting theorems the way other young people quoted song lyrics. Amara stepped out and immediately felt the air change around her. Conversations didn't stop exactly, they just cooled. Eyes slid toward her and then slid away. She found the registration table. A young woman with a clipboard looked up. Name, Amara Johnson. The young woman ran her finger down the list. Once, twice. Her eyebrows pulled together. "Johnson, Amara, are you sure you're registered for this event?" "I registered 3 weeks ago," Amara said. "Online. Public applicant." "We don't get many of those," the young woman murmured almost to herself. Then she found the name. "Oh, here you are. Public participant." She said the word public the way someone might say the word stray. "You'll be seated in the back. Contestants who advance will be called forward." "Thank you," Amara said. She took her badge and turned toward the auditorium, and she heard it low and quick behind her. How did she even get in? She didn't turn around. She had learned a long time ago that turning around was a game you could never win. You could only lose slowly, one look at a time. So she kept walking, chin-level backpack on her shoulder, into the largest mathematics auditorium in the building, and she climbed all the way to the last row, and she sat down alone. Row by row, the room filled. Hundreds of students, professors along the sides, graduate researchers in the front with notebooks open and pens ready. Somewhere near the middle, a cluster of young men were laughing about something, and one of them glanced back at her, said something to the others, and the whole group turned to look. She met their eyes. They looked away first. She counted that quietly as a small victory, and she put her hands in her lap and waited. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors at the front opened, and Professor Richard Whitmore walked in. The whole room seemed to sit up straighter. Whitmore was a tall man, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that a person only builds after decades of never being told he was wrong. He wore a dark blazer and carried nothing in his hands because he did not need notes. He had given this speech in one form or another for 30 years. He walked to the center of the stage, let the silence build, and then smiled at the room the way a king smiles at a court. "Good morning," he said. "Welcome to the Harvard Advanced Mathematics Challenge. Look around you. The people in this room represent the finest young mathematical minds this country has produced. You have earned your place here through years of work, through discipline, through sacrifice." He paused. "Well, most of you have." A ripple of laughter moved through the front rows. Amara did not know in that moment that the joke was about her, but somehow in her chest she felt it land anyway. "I have spent my life," Whitmore continued, "in pursuit of a single question. What separates a true mathematician from an ordinary student anyone can memorize? Anyone can follow a formula, but very, very few can see." He tapped the side of his head. "So this morning, before we begin the competition, I would like to show you something. A problem I designed myself. And I will tell you honestly, in 30 years I have watched hundreds of gifted students look at this problem and fail to even understand what it is asking." He turned, and behind him on the enormous board that stretched across the stage, the problem appeared line after line, symbol after symbol, a wall of mathematics so dense that half the room leaned forward and the other half leaned back. "Take your time," Whitmore said, folding his arms. "Many talented people believe they can solve difficult problems, but very few actually can." The room laughed again, softer this time, respectful, the laughter of people who wanted the great man to know they were on his side. And in the back row, Amara Johnson leaned forward and started to read. She read it once quickly, the way you scan a face across a crowded room, and something snagged. She didn't know what yet. She read it again, slower this time, following every line, every substitution, every step, the way her mother had taught her, to read a bill before she paid it. "Check every number, baby. They count on you being tired." And there on the fourth line, where the professor had carried a term from one side of an equation to the other, she felt her whole body go still. She read it a third time to be sure, because she had been wrong before in her life about a lot of things. But she had never been wrong about this. Not about numbers. Numbers were the one place in the whole world where nobody could lie to her and win. The term had changed sign where it should not have. A minus that should have stayed a minus had quietly, almost invisibly, become a plus. And everything built on top of that line, all of it, every beautiful symbol that followed, was standing on a crack. Her heart began to pound. She looked around the room. 500 people, professors, researchers, students who had gone to schools she could never have afforded. And not one of them was frowning. Not one of them had seen it. They were all nodding along, admiring the elegance of a house built on sand. She looked down at her own hands. She thought about the security guard. She thought about the woman at the registration table who had said the word public like it was a stain. She thought about every application she had ever sent, every polite letter that had come back, every not the right fit. She thought about her mother right now, at this exact moment, standing in a hospital cafeteria 3 states away, ladling soup into bowls so that her daughter could sit in this room. And then slowly, before her mind could talk her out of it, Amara Johnson raised her hand. At first nobody noticed. Whitmore had already turned away and was speaking to a professor near the stage. But then a student near the front spotted her and nudged the person next to him, and heads began to turn. The whisper spread through the room like a draft under a door. Whitmore felt the shift in attention and looked up. His eyes found her at the very back. A young black woman in a second-hand jacket, hand in the air, alone in the last row. He smiled. "Yes," he said. "You in the back. Do you have a question?" The room turned as one to look at her. Amara stood. Her legs were not entirely steady, but she made them hold. "Professor," she said, and her voice carried farther than she expected in the sudden quiet. "I believe there is a mistake in your equation." The silence that followed was total, and then it broke all at once into laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that it filled the room and pressed down on her from every direction. A young man in the third row laughed so hard he had to cover his mouth. A professor along the side shook his head and looked at the ceiling as if asking heaven for patience. Whitmore let the laughter run for a moment. Then he raised one hand and it stopped. "A mistake," he repeated, savoring the word, "in my equation." He tilted his head, studying her the way a man studies an insect he is deciding whether to swat. "Tell me, what is your name?" "Amara Johnson." "And which program are you in, Miss Johnson?" "I'm not in a program here. I'm a public participant." A murmur moved through the room. Whitmore's smile widened, and it was not kind. "A public participant," he said. "How wonderful. And where did you complete your undergraduate studies?" "A state university," Amara said. "In Illinois." "A state university in Illinois." He said each word slowly, letting the crowd draw its own conclusions. "And you have come all the way to Harvard to inform me in front of 500 people that in 30 years of research, I have made a mistake that not one of my colleagues, not one of my students, and not one reviewer of my published work has ever noticed." He spread his arms wide. "You," he said. And then he laughed. The loud one, the cruel one, the one that rolled across the whole room. "My dear people spend their entire careers trying to simply understand my work," the room roared. Amara stood in the storm of it. She felt her face burn. She felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. And underneath all of it, underneath the shame and the anger and the roar of 500 people laughing at her, she felt something cold and clear and steady, like the surface of a frozen lake. Because she was right. She knew she was right. And being right was the only thing they could not take from her. When the laughter faded, Whitmore was still smiling, and he made a small, gracious gesture toward the stage, the gesture of a man who has already won. "Please," he said, "come down, come to the board. Show us all this terrible mistake. We are all so eager to learn." He did not think she would do it. She could see that on his face. He thought she would sit down red-faced, and he would make a gentle joke, and the competition would move on. And by lunchtime, she would be a story he told at dinner. The public participant who thought she'd found an error. His colleagues would laugh. He did not know Amara Johnson. She stepped out of her row, and she began to walk down the long aisle toward the stage. Every step took her past faces, some amused, some pitying, some already bored, waiting for the show to be over. A young man leaned to his friend and said not quite quietly enough, "This is going to be painful to watch." Amara heard it. She kept walking. She had walked down longer aisles than this one. She had walked down the aisle at her father's funeral when she was 9 years old. She could walk down this one. She reached the stage, she climbed the 3 steps, and she stood in front of the enormous board in front of 500 people next to a man who had spent his whole life certain that people like her did not belong in rooms like this. Whitmore held out a piece of chalk to her pinched between 2 fingers with a little flourish, as if he were handing a toy to a child. Amara took it. "Now," he said, turning to address the audience, playing to them, warming them up, "Miss Johnson is going to show us all where I went wrong. Please, whenever you're ready, we have all morning." Someone laughed. "Well," Whitmore added, "some of us have all morning." Amara did not rise to it. She turned to the board. She found the 4th line. And she began to speak, and her voice, which had shaken when she stood, was steady now. Because here on this board, she was not a public participant. She was not a girl from the South Side. She was not the thing the security guard had assumed she was. Here she was, only a mind and the numbers and the truth. On the first 3 lines, she said, "Everything is correct. Your setup is elegant. I want to say that first. This is a beautiful problem." She meant it, and it showed, and a few people in the front frowned because they had expected a fool and were hearing something else. But right here, she raised the chalk and touched the 4th line under a single term. You move this term across the equals sign, and when a term crosses the equals sign, its sign has to change. A minus becomes a plus. A plus becomes a minus. That's the rule. Every 8th grader learns it. I am aware of the rule, Miss Johnson, Whitmore said dryly, and the room chuckled. I know you are, Amara said. That's what makes it easy to miss, because on line 4, this term was negative, and when you carried it over, it should have become positive, but it didn't. It stayed negative. She circled it hard, the chalk squeaking. Right here, the sign never changed. Whitmore's smile flickered just slightly at the corner of his mouth. He stepped closer to the board. He looked at line 4. That, he said, is a positive term. No, sir, Amara said. It's negative. Look at line 3. It comes from here. She drew a line connecting the two. It's inside a subtraction, so when it crosses over, the sign flips. But in your version, it didn't flip, which means every single line after this one is built on a value that's wrong. A silence had begun to spread through the front rows. Not the mocking silence from before, a different kind. The kind of silence that happens when smart people, one by one, start to actually look. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Young lady, he said, and the my dear was gone now. I have published this exact derivation. It has been peer-reviewed by the finest journal in the field. If there were an error of the kind you are describing, it would have been caught. Maybe nobody looked, Amara said quietly. Maybe everybody assumed that if you wrote it, it had to be right. That's how it usually works, isn't it? Somewhere in the room, someone drew in a sharp breath. Whitmore stared at her, and for the first time that morning, something crossed his face that had not been there before. Not amusement, not contempt. Something closer to alarm, because he had just looked at line 4 and line 5, and he had followed his own logic backward, and a cold, thin thread of doubt had begun to work its way into the great certainty of Richard Whitmore. He recovered fast. Men like him always did. This is absurd, he said, turning to the audience with a broad, forgiving smile. I'm not going to allow a first-year competition to be hijacked by a public participant with a chalk and a theory. Miss Johnson, thank you for your enthusiasm. You may return to your seat. But the room had changed. He could feel it, and so could she. Because near the front, a young woman with dark-rimmed glasses had pulled the problem up on her tablet and was tracing line 4 with her finger, her lips moving. And 2 rows behind her, a graduate student had opened his notebook and was rewriting the derivation from scratch. And along the left side of the stage, a woman in her 60s, silver-haired, who had been sitting perfectly still through the entire exchange, leaned slowly forward in her chair and put on her reading glasses. Sit down, Miss Johnson, Whitmore said again, and this time there was an edge in it. Amara did not sit down. If I'm wrong, she said loud enough for the whole room, it will take you 10 seconds to prove it. Just substitute a real number. Pick any number. Plug it into your equation and plug it into the corrected one and see which one holds. If yours holds, I'll walk out of this building right now and you'll never see me again. But if it doesn't, she let the words sit, then everyone in this room deserves to know. The challenge hung in the air. It was a trap, and everyone understood it, and the beauty of it was that it was made of pure mathematics, and there was no way out of it that did not run straight through the truth. I don't need to plug in a number, Whitmore snapped. I know my own work. Then you won't mind if I do, Amara said, and she turned back to the board and she began to write. She wrote fast and clean, no wasted motion, the chalk clicking against the board in a steady rhythm. She rebuilt line 4 the correct way with the sign flipped, and then she carried it forward line by line, showing the whole room how the entire structure changed once that one small error was corrected. The elegant tower Whitmore had built came apart in her hands and reassembled into something else, something that actually held together. And then at the bottom, she chose a number, a simple one, the number 3. Watch, she said. Your version says the answer should be 7. Mine says the answer should be -1. So let's test it. Let's put 3 back into the original problem, the one you designed, and just compute it directly. No shortcuts, no theory, just arithmetic. The room held its breath. Amara worked through it step by step, slowly enough that everyone could follow, writing every operation, hiding nothing. And at the bottom of the board, the direct computation gave an answer. -1, not 7, -1. The number sat there on the board, plain and undeniable in a young woman's handwriting at the bottom of Richard Whitmore's famous problem. And the silence in the room was no longer the silence of doubt. It was the silence of 500 people all realizing the same thing at the same moment. She was right. She had been right the entire time. For a long, long moment, nobody moved. Whitmore stood staring at the board, at the number, at the clean chain of arithmetic that led to it, and there was no laughter left in his face. His mouth opened. It closed. He looked out at the room, at his colleagues, at the young researchers who had admired him for years, and he saw on their faces the beginning of something he had never seen directed at himself in 30 years. He turned back to Amara, and he did the thing that men like him do when the truth arrives, and they are not ready for it. He got angry. "This is a stunt," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. "You've cherry-picked a value. You've manipulated the problem. This is not how serious mathematics is done by ambushing a scholar in front of an audience with parlor tricks." "It's not a trick, Professor," Amara said, and there was no triumph in her voice. That was the thing that landed hardest later when people told the story. There was no gloating in her at all. She sounded almost sad. "It's just arithmetic. Pick a different number if you don't like 3. Pick 100, pick 1,000. It'll fail every single time because the mistake is real. It's been real this whole time, and I don't think you knew. I really don't. I think you believed it was right because for 30 years nobody ever told you it wasn't." The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the lights. "How dare you?" Whitmore said very low. "I'm not trying to embarrass you," Amara said. "I came here to compete, that's all. But you asked me to come down to this board. You asked me in front of everyone, and I wasn't going to stand up there and pretend I didn't see what I saw, because I've spent my whole life being told to pretend I don't see things. And I'm tired, Professor. I'm just tired." Something in the room shifted then. You could feel it move like weather. Because the young woman with the dark-rimmed glasses in the front row stood up. She was maybe 19 years old, a first year, and her hands were shaking, but she stood. "She's right," the girl said. Whitmore's head snapped toward her. "Sit down." "I ran it," the girl said, holding up her tablet, her voice climbing over its own fear. "I ran it on line 4. I got -1 too. She's right. The sign is wrong. It's been wrong the whole time." "Sit down," Whitmore said again, but a second voice had already joined the first from the graduate student with the notebook. "I got -1 as well," he said, standing. "I derived it from scratch. Professor, the math is the math. She found it." And then a third voice, and a fourth. All across the auditorium, students who had laughed at her 10 minutes ago were now bent over their own calculations, and one by one they were arriving at the same impossible truth, and one by one they were saying it out loud. And Richard Whitmore stood at the center of the stage and watched his kingdom turn on its axis. "This is a mathematics competition," he said, raising his voice over the growing noise. "Not a mob. I will not have my life's work overturned by a public participant in a room full of first years who couldn't have found this on their own 5 minutes ago." And that was the sentence that broke it, because a woman rose from her seat along the left side of the stage, the silver-haired woman who had been sitting so still. She stood slowly, deliberately, and she did not shout, and she did not need to, because when she rose, the entire room fell quiet on its own out of pure instinct, out of respect. She was Dr. Evelyn Carter. Amara did not know that yet, but every professor in that room did, and they all sat up when she stood. Dr. Carter walked toward the stage, unhurried, her reading glasses still perched on her nose, and she climbed the 3 steps, and she crossed to the board, and she stood beside Amara and looked at the work. For a long time, she followed it from top to bottom. She followed the corrected line 4. She followed the arithmetic to the number at the bottom. And then she turned not to Amara and not to the room, but to Richard Whitmore. "Richard," she said quietly, "the young woman is correct." Whitmore's face went white. "Evelyn." "The sign is wrong on line 4, Dr. Carter said in the calm, even voice of a person who has spent 50 years refusing to lie about numbers. "I don't know how it was missed, but it was missed, and she found it in, 2 minutes?" She looked at Amara. "How long did it take you?" Amara swallowed. "I read it 3 times, she said, "to be sure." "3 times, Dr. Carter repeated. She turned back to the room and she said in a voice that carried to the very last row, 3 times. This young woman read a problem that this entire room admired 3 times and found an error that 30 years of peer review did not. I've been doing mathematics for half a century, and I am telling all of you right now to remember this moment, because you are going to be telling people about it for the rest of your lives." The room did not laugh now. Nobody laughed now. Richard Whitmore stood alone at the center of his own stage in front of 500 people next to a board that told the truth in a young woman's handwriting, and he opened his mouth one last time to defend himself, to explain, to reach for 30 years of authority and pull it back over himself like a coat. But no words came, no words. And in the silence, Amara Johnson set the chalk down gently on the ledge of the board. She did not slam it. She did not throw it. She placed it down the way her mother had taught her to place things down with care, because you never knew who would have to pick them up after you. And she turned to Dr. Carter, and she said so softly that only the older woman heard it, "Thank you for looking." Dr. Carter's face changed then, just for a second. Because in those 4 words, "Thank you for looking," she heard an entire life. She heard a girl who had spent 22 years waiting for someone, anyone, to simply look and to see what was actually there instead of what they had already decided was there. "Don't thank me," Dr. Carter said. "You did the work. I just refuse to look away." And in the back of the room, unnoticed by almost everyone, a young man who had laughed the loudest 10 minutes ago sat very still, staring at his own notebook, at the number he had computed himself, -1, and he did not know it yet, but he would think about this morning for the rest of his life. Whitmore finally found his voice, but it was smaller now, thinner, a man reaching for the edge of a stage that was slipping out from under him. "The competition," he said. We should proceed with the competition." "Yes," Dr. Carter said. "We should." And then she looked at Amara, and she said loud enough for the room, "Miss Johnson, you came here to compete, so compete, and I, for one, am very interested to see what you do next." Amara stood on that stage, 500 faces turned toward her, and for the first time in a long, long time, they were not looking at her jacket. They were not looking at her backpack. They were not looking at where she came from. They were looking at her mind. And she thought about her mother in that cafeteria, ladling soup, waiting for a phone call that night. And she made a promise to herself right there that when she called, she would have something to say. She walked back up the long aisle to the last row, but it was a different walk now. The faces she passed did not smirk. Some of them nodded. One young woman reached out and touched her arm and whispered, "That was incredible." And Amara nodded back and kept walking and sat down in the same seat she had started in, the public participant seat in the very back row. But she did not feel like she was in the back anymore. At the front of the room, Richard Whitmore was trying to compose himself, shuffling toward the podium, calling for the official competition to begin. His hands, though, were not steady, and every so often, without meaning to, his eyes moved to the back of the room, to the young woman in the second-hand jacket, and there was something in his expression now that he could not hide, and it was not contempt. It was fear. Because Richard Whitmore had built his entire life on a single unspoken belief that brilliance had a certain look, that it came from certain schools, certain families, certain rooms, that a person could tell just by looking who belonged and who did not. He had believed it so deeply for so long that he had stopped even noticing he believed it. And in the space of 10 minutes, a 22-year-old woman he had laughed at from a stage had reached into that belief and pulled out its foundation the way she had pulled the error out of his equation. And now the whole thing was standing on a crack, and he could feel it, and he did not know how to make it hold. Amara did not know any of that. She did not know what was coming. She did not know that this morning was only the first line of a much longer proof, and that everything after it, every step would flow from this one moment the way every line of an equation flows from the first. She only knew that she had been right, and that someone finally had looked. She reached into her backpack and took out a worn notebook, its cover soft from years of handling, and she opened it to a fresh page. The next problem was already appearing on the board. Around her, the finest young minds in America bent to their work. And in the back row alone, a girl from the south side of Chicago picked up her pen and read the problem once, and then a second time, and then a third time to be sure. Because that was the only way she had ever known how to do it. Careful, honest. 3 times. And this time when she looked up, The whole room was already watching to see what she would do. That night, Amara Johnson sat alone on the narrow bed of a motel room 40 minutes from campus, holding her phone in both hands, and she could not make herself dial her mother's number. She had won the first round. She had walked back up that aisle with 500 people watching her differently than they had that morning. And yet, sitting here now in a room that smelled like bleach and old carpet with the neon sign outside flickering red against the curtains, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, something closer to fear. Because winning one round had done something she was not ready for. It had made her visible. And in Amara's experience, being visible had never once made her safe. She dialed. Her mother picked up on the first ring. "Amara, baby, is that you? What happened? Tell me everything." Monica Johnson's voice came through the phone, tired and hopeful, the voice of a woman who had just finished a double shift and had been staring at her own phone for 3 hours waiting. "Mama," Amara said, and her voice broke on the single word. "Oh no. Oh baby, what happened? Did those people say something to you? I swear if somebody made my child feel small in that place, I will get on a bus tonight." "No, Mama," Amara laughed, wet and shaking. "No, it's not that." She pressed her free hand over her eyes. "Mama, I won. I won the first round." There was a silence on the line, and then a sound Amara had heard exactly twice before in her whole life. The sound of her mother crying. "You won," Monica whispered. "My baby won at Harvard." "There was a mistake, Mama, in the professor's problem, the famous one, his whole reputation, and nobody saw it. 500 people and nobody saw it. And I stood up." Amara was crying now too, both of them crying 3 states apart down a phone line. "I stood up like you always told me, and I said it, and I was right, Mama. I was right." "Of course you were right," Monica said fiercely through her tears. "Of course you were. You have always been right about numbers since you were 4 years old, counting the change in my purse. Baby, I have known since you were small that God put something in you that this world was not going to be able to ignore forever. And I told you. Didn't I tell you the door may not open, but you keep knocking?" "You told me," Amara said. "So why do you sound scared?" And there it was. Her mother could always find it, the thing underneath the thing. Amara wiped her face. "Because Mama, the professor, when I proved it in front of everybody, he didn't just lose. He got so angry, and it wasn't the kind of angry that goes away. It was the kind that remembers. I've seen that kind before." She swallowed. "And there are more rounds, 6 more days of this, and I don't think he's going to just let me win." The line was quiet for a moment. "Amara," her mother said, "you listen to me. That man has been standing on top of a mountain his whole life, and he built that mountain out of a lie, and you just showed him the crack in it. So of course he's scared. Of course he's angry. Scared, angry men are the most dangerous kind. But baby," her voice dropped low and certain, "you did not travel across this whole country on a bus with $40 in your pocket to be scared of one old man in a nice jacket. You go back tomorrow, and you do exactly what you did today. You read it 3 times, and you tell the truth, and you let them do whatever they're going to do, because the numbers don't lie, and neither do you. And in the end, the truth is the one thing in this whole world that they cannot take away from you." Amara closed her eyes. "Yes, Mama. Now get some sleep. My daughter's got a competition to win." Amara hung up the phone and sat in the red, flickering dark for a long time, and she did not know it, but 40 minutes away, in a very different room, a very different conversation was happening. Because Richard Whitmore had not gone home either. He was in his office on the phone, and his voice was not the smooth, confident voice he used on stage. It was tight and low and fast. "I don't care how it looks," he said into the receiver. "I'm telling you this cannot stand. Do you understand what happened in that room today? A nobody. A public participant off the street. She made me look like a fraud in front of my own department." He listened. His jaw tightened. "No, Evelyn Carter is exactly the problem. She stood up in front of everyone and validated it. Do you know what that woman's word is worth in this field? If she says the girl found an error, then as far as this department is concerned, the girl found an error. He stood up and began to pace. The problem is not the equation, Harold. Equations can be corrected. The problem is that this girl is going to keep advancing. And every round she survives, it's another headline. Local girl beats Harvard. Do you have any idea what that does to my legacy? He stopped pacing. So here is what we are going to do, he said, and his voice went cold and quiet. The remaining rounds, the problems. I select them. That is my prerogative as the chair of this competition, and I intend to select problems that no one outside of this institution's private research groups has ever seen. Problems that require access to unpublished work. Our work. Let her be brilliant. Brilliance won't help her if she's never even seen the material. You cannot solve what you have never been allowed to learn. He nodded to himself. Let the numbers decide, Harold. That's what she keeps saying. Let the numbers decide. I just intend to make sure the numbers are ones only my people have ever seen. He hung up, and 3 floors up in the mathematics library, a light was still on, because Dr. Evelyn Carter had not gone home either. She was standing at a tall window holding a cup of cold tea, thinking about a young woman who had said 4 words to her that afternoon. Thank you for looking. Dr. Carter had spent 50 years in this field. She had been the only woman in rooms exactly like the one Amara stood in today. She had been laughed at from stages. She had been told to sit down, and she had heard in those 4 words an echo so exact that it had stopped her heart for a beat. She set down her tea. She had a bad feeling. She knew Richard Whitmore. She had known him for 30 years. And she knew that a man like that humiliated did not simply accept it and move on. A man like that found a way to make the humiliation someone else's fault. And she was very much afraid that she knew whose fault he was going to try to make it. She picked up her phone and made a note to herself. Watch the problem selection. Then she turned off the light. The next morning, round 2 began, and Amara knew something was wrong within the first 60 seconds. The problem that appeared on the board was not like the day before. The day before had been a beautiful, elegant general problem, the kind any strong mind could attack. This one was different. It was narrow. It was specialized. It used notation she had seen only twice in her life, in a single obscure paper she had read on a broken laptop at 2 a.m, and even then she had barely understood it. It referenced a technique that she realized with a slow, sinking horror was not in any published textbook. It was the kind of thing you learned only if you sat in a certain seminar in a certain building taught by a certain professor. She looked up. Across the room, 3 of the Harvard students were already writing. Fast, confident, their pens moving without hesitation, because they had seen this before. They had learned this exact technique in a room she had never been allowed into. And at the front of the stage, Richard Whitmore was watching her. Not the board, not the other contestants, her. And on his face was the faintest, most private smile. That was when Amara understood. This was not a competition anymore. This was a trap, and she had walked right into it. She felt the old feeling rise up in her chest, the one from every rejection letter, the one from the security guard's hand on her shoulder, the one that whispered, "You were never supposed to be here, and now they're going to prove it." Her hands went cold. The room seemed to tilt. 3 of the students were already on their second page. She had not written a single line. And then from somewhere deep inside her, she heard her mother's voice. You cannot solve what they never let you learn. But baby, you have never in your life learned things the way they wanted you to. You learned them your own way, on a broken laptop, at 2 a.m, backwards and sideways and upside down. So don't sit there trying to solve it their way. You never could. You solved everything your own way. That's your gift. Not that you know what they know, that you can find what they can't. Amara took a breath. She stopped looking at the technique she didn't know. She stopped trying to remember a seminar she had never attended. Instead, she did the only thing she had ever known how to do. She looked at the problem itself, stripped of its fancy notation, stripped of the specialized method, and she asked herself the simplest possible question. What is this problem actually asking? Not how does Harvard solve it? What is it asking? And slowly underneath all the intimidating notation, she began to see a shape, a pattern, something old and simple hiding under something new and complicated. The specialized technique was just a fast road that only certain people had a map to, but there was another road, a longer one, a harder one that nobody had bothered to pave because nobody who had the fast road ever needed it. And Amara Johnson had spent her entire life walking the roads nobody bothered to pave. She began to write. The clock ran. 20 minutes. The 3 Harvard students finished first, one after another, setting down their pens with satisfied little sighs, glancing back at her with something like pity. Whitmore's smile grew. He thought it was over. He thought the trap had closed. But Amara was still writing, and she was not slowing down. She was speeding up, because she had found the shape, and now she was chasing it line after line down that long, unpaved road, and the further she went, the more certain she became that it led somewhere. 30 minutes. 35. Dr. Evelyn Carter, watching from the side of the stage, had leaned forward in her chair, her whole body still, because she recognized what she was seeing. She had seen it maybe 5 times in 50 years. She was watching someone solve a problem by a method that did not exist until the moment they invented it. 40 minutes. The bell rang. Time. Amara set down her pen. Her hand was cramped. Her page was full top to bottom in her small, careful handwriting, and she had no idea if she was right. She had followed the shape as far as it went, and it had led to an answer, but it was an answer nobody in that room had arrived at because nobody in that room had taken that road. The judges collected the papers. They read the 3 Harvard students first. Correct, correct, correct. All using the specialized technique, all arriving at the same clean answer. Whitmore nodded along, relaxed now waiting. Then they read Amara's, and they stopped. The head judge, a nervous man named Professor Reyes, frowned at her page. He read it again. He passed it to the judge next to him and pointed at something. That judge frowned too. They put their heads together, murmuring. Whitmore leaned over. "What is it?" he said quietly. "She didn't finish, did she? She couldn't have. She's never seen the method." "No," Professor Reyes said slowly. "She didn't use the method at all, Richard. She did something else. She built the whole thing from first principles, from scratch." He looked up, and there was something like awe on his face. "And she got the same answer. She got the same answer without the technique. Richard, I've never seen anyone do this. She reconstructed a graduate-level result from nothing but the problem itself." The color drained from Whitmore's face. "That's not possible," he said. "It's on the page," Reyes said. "It's right here. Every step. It holds." Whitmore stood up. He walked to the judge's table. He picked up Amara's paper himself, and he read it, and the whole room watched him read it, and everyone could see the exact moment his certainty cracked because his hand began to tremble. "This is wrong," he said. But his voice did not have any conviction in it. "Where?" said Dr. Carter. She had come to stand at the edge of the table, and now she held out her hand for the paper. Whitmore did not want to give it to her. Everyone could see that too. But 500 people were watching, and to refuse would be to admit something, so he gave it to her. Dr. Carter read it in silence, and as she read, a slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile she had shown all morning. "Richard," she said without looking up, "do you know what she's done here? She's done nothing. She got lucky. She has produced a proof," Dr. Carter said, still reading, "that is more general than the one your students used. Their method works for this specific case. Hers works for the entire family of cases. Their answer is correct. Her answer is correct and more powerful." She finally looked up, and she looked directly at Whitmore. "You gave her a problem designed to be unsolvable without private access to your seminars. And she not only solved it, she solved it better than the people who had that access. Do you understand what you've just proven, Richard? You wanted to prove she didn't belong. Instead, you've proven she's the best mind in this room." The auditorium erupted. Amara in the back row did not understand at first what was happening. She saw the judges standing. She saw Dr. Carter holding her paper up. She heard the sound rising, 500 people talking at once, and then incredibly someone began to clap, and then someone else. And then the whole room was on its feet, and they were applauding her, the public participant, the girl in the second-hand jacket, and she sat frozen in her seat with her heart pounding, not understanding until the young woman next to her leaned over and shouted over the noise, "You beat their own method. You beat it without even knowing it. Do you understand what you just did?" And Amara did not understand, not fully, not yet. She only knew that she had walked her own road, the long, unpaved one, the way she always had, and it had carried her somewhere the paved road couldn't reach. But at the front of the room, Richard Whitmore was not applauding. He was staring at her, and the fear on his face had curdled into something harder, because his trap had not just failed, it had backfired. He had tried to expose her weakness, and had instead broadcast her genius to the entire department. Every round he made harder, she was going to climb. He understood that now. He could not beat her with mathematics. She was better at mathematics than he was. He had suspected it yesterday. Today he knew it. So Richard Whitmore made a decision. If he could not beat her with the numbers, he would beat her some other way. He would find out who she was, and he would find something to use. That afternoon, while Amara was celebrating quietly in a corner of the campus coffee shop with the young woman who'd sat beside her, a first-year named Priya, who had become, over the course of a single morning, something like her first friend in this entire hostile place. Richard Whitmore was in his office, with the door closed, and a private investigator's business card on his desk, and a phone pressed to his ear. "I need everything," he said. "Amara Johnson, Chicago, State School in Illinois. I want to know where she came from, who her people are, whether she's ever been in trouble, whether there is anything at all that would disqualify her from this competition or discredit her publicly. There has to be something. There is always something. Find it." He hung up, and he could not have known that his own secretary, a quiet woman named Denise who had worked for him for 11 years and had watched him treat people like furniture, for every one of them had heard every word through the thin office wall. Denise sat at her desk for a long moment. Then she picked up her own phone, and she found a number she had saved that morning, the number of Dr. Evelyn Carter's office, and she took a deep breath because she knew that what she was about to do could cost her the job she had held for 11 years. She dialed anyway. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, "you don't know me. My name is Denise. I work for Professor Whitmore, and I think you need to know what he's about to do to that girl." Meanwhile, Amara was learning something about her new friend. "You have to understand what you did in there," Priya was saying, leaning across the small table, her tea going cold. "That method they used, the one the three of them knew, that's from Whitmore's private seminar. It's invitation only. I applied twice. I have a 4.0, and I applied twice, and I didn't get in. They only take students from certain She looked embarrassed. Certain backgrounds, certain families. Everybody knows it. Nobody says it. And he handed you a problem that required that seminar on purpose. He was trying to knock you out." Amara set down her cup. "You knew that while I was up there." "I figured it out about 10 minutes in," Priya admitted. "I was so scared for you. I thought that's it, they got her. There's no way she's seen this. And then she shook her head. "You just built your own way through it, from nothing. Amara, I've been at this school for a year, and I have never seen anything like that. Where did you even learn to think like that?" And Amara was quiet for a moment. "On a laptop with a broken screen," she said finally. "My mom got it from the church donation bin when I was 13. Half the display didn't work, so I could only see the top part of any video. So I'd watch these free university lectures, but I could only ever see the top half of the board." She smiled a little at a memory. "So I had to figure out the bottom half myself. Every time, for years. I'd watch a professor start a proof, and then the screen would cut off, and I'd have to finish it on my own before I could check if I was right." She looked at Priya. "I didn't know I was learning to build my own roads. I just thought I had a broken laptop." Priya stared at her, and then unexpectedly her eyes filled with tears. "That's the most incredible thing I've ever heard," she said. "It's just a broken laptop." "No," Priya said. "It's not. Don't you see? Everything. Whitmore has the seminars, the private access, all of it. It's designed to give people the bottom half of the board, so they never have to think. And you never had the bottom half. So you learned to see the whole thing. That's why you're beating them. You're not beating them despite where you came from. You're beating them because of it." Amara did not answer, but something in her chest shifted and settled, and for the first time, she began to understand that the thing she had spent her whole life being ashamed of, the broken laptop, the state school, the back rows, might be the exact thing that made her dangerous. She did not know that at that very moment a private investigator was already pulling up her records. She did not know that Whitmore was already planning how to use them. She only knew that she had one friend in this place now and 3 more rounds to survive, and a truth she was only beginning to believe: that she belonged here, not because they let her in, but because she was better. The next 2 days, Whitmore escalated. Round 3, he selected a problem so specialized, so buried in unpublished research, that even 2 of his own hand-picked students failed to finish it. And Amara solved it. Not quickly, not easily. She sat at that board, sweating, her mind cramping, for the full 40 minutes, and with 90 seconds left, she found the shape the way she always did, the hidden, simple thing under the complicated thing. And she wrote the answer with the bell ringing in her ears. Round 4, he tried something crueler. He had the problem printed with a deliberate ambiguity in the wording, a trap that would lead a solver down a false path unless they had been told in advance in a private seminar how to read it correctly. 3 students, forewarned, avoided the trap. Amara, reading only the words on the page, fell into it. For 20 minutes, she went the wrong direction, and Whitmore watched her go, and his private smile came back. And then Amara stopped. She looked at what she'd written, and something bothered her. The problem, as she'd read it, led to an answer that was too clean, too convenient. In her experience, when a problem gave you an answer that was too clean, it usually meant you'd been told what to think instead of shown. She had learned that from her mother checking bills at the kitchen table. When something looks too easy, baby, that's when they're robbing you. So Amara did something no one expected. She raised her hand and she asked the judges out loud in front of everyone, "This problem can be read 2 ways. Which one do you mean?" The room went quiet. Because it was true. Everyone could suddenly see it. The ambiguity that had been planted to trap her was now exposed in the open in front of 500 witnesses. And Professor Reyes, the head judge, an honest man who had been growing more and more uncomfortable with each round, looked at the problem and looked at Whitmore and understood. "It," Reyes said slowly, "can indeed be read 2 ways. That shouldn't be. A competition problem should be unambiguous." He looked at Whitmore. "Richard, who wrote this one?" "I did," Whitmore said stiffly. "Then perhaps you could clarify the intended reading." And Whitmore was trapped, because if he clarified it, he'd be handing Amara the exact information his seminar students had been given in advance, exposing that they'd had it. And if he refused, he'd look like he was hiding something. Every eye in the room was on him, and in that moment, Amara watched a powerful man squirm, and she understood that she had just done to him with one honest question what he had been trying to do to her for 4 days. The standard reading," Whitmore managed, "the conventional interpretation." "There is no conventional interpretation," Amara said quietly. "That's the point. It's ambiguous, unless someone told you in advance which way to read it." The silence that followed was very loud. Dr. Carter at the side of the stage did not say a word. She did not have to. She simply looked at Professor Reyes, and Reyes looked back at her, and a whole conversation passed between them without a sound. They voided round 4, no winner, and Amara, who by every technicality had failed it, walked out of that room having won something much larger. Because now the other judges were watching. Now the questions had started. Now it was not just Amara against Whitmore. It was the truth, slowly, quietly beginning to leak out through the cracks. That night, Denise, the secretary, met Dr. Carter in an empty classroom. "He hired an investigator," Denise said, her hands shaking, "to dig into the girl's past. He wants to find something to disqualify her or embarrass her publicly. He said, there's always something. He said it just like that. There's always something." She looked at Dr. Carter with tears in her eyes. "I've worked for that man for 11 years. I've watched him do things like this to people. Quietly. Where nobody sees. Junior faculty, grad students, people who couldn't fight back. And I never said anything because I needed the job and I told myself it wasn't my business." Her voice cracked. But that girl is 22 years old. She came here on a bus with nothing, and she's better than all of them, and he knows it, and he's going to try to destroy her for it. And I can't watch it happen again. I can't. Dr. Carter was quiet for a long time. You understand, she said gently, that if you help me and he finds out, you will lose your job. I know. You have children. 2. Denise wiped her face. That's the thing. I have a daughter. She's 16, and she's smart, Dr. Carter. She's so smart. And I keep thinking, what if it was her up there? What if it was my girl and some man like him decided she didn't deserve what she'd earned? Wouldn't I want somebody to stand up? She squared her shoulders. So I'm standing up. Tell me what you need. And Dr. Carter, who had spent 50 years watching good people stay silent, felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. I need you to keep your eyes open, she said, and I need you to write down everything. Every problem he selects, every conversation you overhear, every irregularity, dates, times, words. Because, Denise, I have suspected for a long time that Richard Whitmore does not run this competition fairly. But suspecting is not proving, and if we are going to stop him, we cannot do it with our word against his. We have to do it with evidence, with the numbers, because in the end... She almost smiled. That's the one thing men like him can't argue with. The numbers don't lie. Denise nodded, and she began that very night to keep a record. Meanwhile, Amara had no idea that a war was being fought on her behalf in the shadows. She knew only that the rounds kept getting harder and stranger and more clearly rigged against her, and that somehow impossibly she kept surviving them. She was down to the final 2 contestants now herself, and a young man named Trevor Ashford, and Trevor was, it turned out, Richard Whitmore's star pupil, his protege, the pride of the private seminar. And it did not take a genius to see that Whitmore intended for Trevor to win, and had built the entire final structure of the competition to make sure of it. On the 5th night, Amara called her mother again. I don't know if I can win this. Mama, she said, the last problem. The semifinal. He gets to choose it, and he's going to choose something only Trevor has ever seen. There won't be a road for me this time. There won't be anything to build from. He's going to make sure of it. Then you'll build one anyway, Monica said. You don't understand. This isn't like the others. This is his own unpublished research, his life's work. Trevor's been studying it for 2 years. I'll be seeing it for the first time in real time, with a clock running in front of 500 people who are waiting for me to finally fail. Amara's voice was small. Maybe I'm not supposed to win this, Mama. Maybe I was supposed to prove I belonged, and I did that, and maybe that's enough. Maybe I don't have to win the whole thing. There was a silence on the line. Amara Johnson, her mother said finally, and Amara sat up straight because her mother only used all 3 names when she meant business. Let me tell you something I've never told you. When I was pregnant with you, I was working at that same hospital cleaning rooms, and one day a doctor, a big, important doctor, dropped his clipboard, and I bent down to pick it up for him. And he looked at me and he said, "Thank you." And then he said, "You'd be surprised how many of you people don't even know how to read these charts. You people." Like I was a different kind of animal. And I stood there with his clipboard in my hand, and I read it back to him out loud, every word, every number, because I could read just fine, and I watched his face change. Her voice was fierce now. And I decided right then with you inside me that my child was never going to be surprised anybody. My child was going to walk into every room already knowing she was the smartest person in it, and she was going to make them know it too. So don't you dare tell me maybe you don't have to win. You go into that room tomorrow, and you win not for you. You win for me. You win for every woman who ever bent down to pick up some man's clipboard and got told she couldn't read. You win, baby. You win the whole thing. Amara was crying. Yes, Mama. Read it 3 times. Yes, Mama. And Amara, I'm proud of you. Whatever happens tomorrow, I have been proud of you every single day since the day you were born, and there is nothing that man can do, nothing that will ever change that. You hear me? I hear you, Mama. She hung up, and she sat in the dark. And she did not know that tomorrow in the semifinal round in front of 500 people, Richard Whitmore was going to present a problem based on his own secret research, a problem he was certain she could not solve, and that when the final seconds ran out, he was going to step forward and tell the entire auditorium that she had failed. She did not know any of that yet, but her mother was right about one thing. Amara Johnson was going to read it 3 times, and she was going to find in the corner of that problem, in a place no one thought to look, the one thing Richard Whitmore had never imagined she could find. The mistake he didn't even know he'd made. The morning of the semifinal, Amara arrived at the auditorium an hour early, and she was not alone. Priya was waiting for her at the doors holding 2 cups of coffee, and her face was pale. "I have to tell you something," Priya said before Amara could even say good morning. "And I don't know if I should, and I've been up all night trying to decide, but you deserve to know what you're walking into." "Tell me," Amara said. Priya pulled her aside away from the students already trickling in. "Trevor talked last night, at a party. He was drunk and he was bragging, and my roommate was there, and she texted me at 2 in the morning. She swallowed. "Amara, he knows the problem. The semifinal problem. Whitmore gave it to him a week ago. He's been practicing it for 7 days. He said the words, he said, today's the day they finally put the charity case back where she belongs." Priya's eyes filled. I'm so sorry, that's what he said." Amara stood very still, and she waited for the anger to come the way it always came, hot and fast, the feeling from the security guard and the rejection letters and every not the right fit. But it didn't come. Instead, something cold and clear settled over her, the frozen lake feeling, the one she got when the numbers were about to speak. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay?" Priya stared at her. "That's it, Amara. He's had the problem for a week. You'll be seeing it for the first time. That's not a competition, that's an execution." "I know," Amara said, and then slowly she almost smiled. "But here's the thing, Priya. If Whitmore gave Trevor the problem a week ago, then Whitmore is sure. He's completely sure. He thinks he's already won, and I have learned something about men who are completely sure they've already won." She looked at her friend. "They stop checking their own work. Because why would they? They already know how it ends." Priya didn't understand. Not yet. But she would. They walked in together. The auditorium was fuller than it had been all week. Word had spread across campus. The public participant, the girl from Chicago, had made it to the semifinal, and today she would face Whitmore's golden boy in a battle everyone assumed was already decided. There were reporters now from the campus paper, and one from a city outlet, cameras set up along the side. And there were more professors than before, drawn by the whispers, by the questions that had started leaking out of the last few rounds. Something was happening in that competition, and the people who paid attention to such things had come to see how it ended. Dr. Evelyn Carter sat in her usual place at the side of the stage, but this morning she had a leather folder on her lap, and inside that folder was 5 days of Denise's careful records, and Dr. Carter's face was calm in the particular way of a person who is holding something heavy and waiting for exactly the right moment to set it down. Denise herself stood at the very back by the doors, where she could watch and not be seen. Her hands were cold. She had not slept. At 9 o'clock, Richard Whitmore walked onto the stage, and he was a different man than he had been 5 days ago. The fear was gone from his face. He was smiling, relaxed, expansive, the great professor at the height of his powers, because today he was certain everything went back to the way it was supposed to be. "Good morning," he said warmly. "We have arrived at the semifinal round of the Harvard Advanced Mathematics Challenge. 2 contestants remain. Mr. Trevor Ashford, one of the finest students I have had the privilege to teach." He gestured and Trevor stood, and the front rows applauded, and Trevor gave a little wave, confident, easy, a young man who already knew how his day was going to end. "And Miss Amara Johnson, our public participant, who has given us all quite a memorable week." There was applause for Amara, 2 real applause from the back rows, from the students who had watched her fight from Priya, who was clapping so hard her hands hurt. Amara did not stand. She just nodded once. "Now," Whitmore said, and his voice took on a new gravity, "for the semifinal I have chosen something special, a problem drawn from my own research. Work that represents the culmination of the last decade of my career. This is not a textbook problem. This is the frontier, and I will be honest with you all." He paused, and his eyes flicked just for an instant to the back row. "I do not expect it to be solved today. I expect it to be attempted. And in the attempt, we will see the difference between a mind trained in the finest tradition of this institution and a mind that, however clever, however scrappy, simply has not had the years of preparation such work requires." It was a speech designed to lose Amara before she'd begun, to tell the room in advance that if she failed, it only proved what everyone already knew, and if by some miracle she succeeded, well, she couldn't. So why worry? It was elegant. It was cruel. And Amara sat in the back and listened to it and felt the frozen lake spread wider in her chest. "Contestants," Whitmore said, "come forward." Amara and Trevor walked to the two boards set up on either side of the stage. Trevor moved with the loose confidence of a young man who has practiced his lines. He even leaned over as they passed and murmured, just for her, "No hard feelings? You had a good run, really." Amara did not answer him. She was already looking at the problem. It appeared on both boards at once, and the room drew a collective breath because it was enormous, dense, forbidding, a wall of notation that stretched from the top of the board to the bottom, referencing techniques and structures that lived only in the private world of Whitmore's research group. Trevor smiled at it the way you smile at an old friend. He picked up his chalk immediately and began to write fast, confident, retracing the steps he had rehearsed for 7 days. And Amara stood in front of her board and she did not pick up her chalk. She read it. The clock started. 40 minutes. Whitmore watched her not writing, and his smile deepened. This was the moment. This was what he had built. The girl frozen in front of a problem she had no way to solve while his protégé raced toward the finish. He folded his arms and settled in to watch her fail in front of 500 people and a city reporter with a camera. 2 minutes gone. Amara had not written a single mark. She was reading it a second time. Trevor had filled a third of his board. Someone in the front row whispered, "She's stuck. Look at her. She's completely stuck." And it did look that way. To everyone in that room, it looked like the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment the impossible run finally ended. But Priya, watching from the fourth row, gripped the edge of her seat. Because she had seen this before. She had seen Amara stand frozen in round 2 and round 3 doing nothing reading, while everyone assumed she was lost, and she knew what it meant. Amara wasn't stuck. Amara was hunting. 4 minutes gone, and Amara began her third read. This was the thing Whitmore did not understand about her, could never have understood because he had spent his whole life with the bottom half of the board. He thought reading a problem 3 times was a weakness, a slowness, a sign of a mind that could not keep up. He did not know that it was the opposite. He did not know that a girl with a broken laptop had learned to extract every drop of meaning from every line because she had never been able to afford to miss anything, because nobody had ever been there to fill in what she missed. And on the third read, Amara found it. It was in the corner of the problem, the lower right. A definition, a boundary condition, a small assumption that Whitmore had written down so many thousands of times over the last decade that he no longer even saw it. It was load-bearing. Everything in the problem rested on it, and it was wrong. Not wrong the way line 4 had been wrong on the first day, a simple sign error. This was deeper. This was a flaw in the foundation of his research itself. The assumption he had built his entire last decade on contained a hidden contradiction, one that only appeared when you pushed the problem to a certain edge, an edge case that Whitmore in 10 years had never pushed it to, because he already knew he was right, and men who already know they are right stop checking their own work. Amara stood in front of that board chalk still in her hand, and she felt the whole world go very quiet, because she understood in that instant what she was looking at. She was not looking at a hard problem. She was looking at the crack at the center of Richard Whitmore's life. The thing that if she pulled on it would not just win her the round, it would unravel a decade of published research. It would end him, and she had a choice to make. She could solve the problem the way Whitmore intended, walk the road he'd blocked, and probably fail because there was no road for her there. Or she could tell the truth about what she'd actually found. And telling the truth would not be clever. It would not be a neat little victory. It would be a bomb dropped in the middle of a crowded room and everyone would see it go off. 6 minutes gone. Trevor was halfway down his board. Amara thought about her mother. "You win, baby. Not for you. For every woman who ever bent down to pick up some man's clipboard and got told she couldn't read." She raised her hand. At first, Whitmore didn't see it. He was watching Trevor. But then a murmur went through the room, that same draft under the door whisper from the first day, and he turned and there she was, the public participant, hand in the air, not writing, just like the first day. Something cold touched the back of his neck. "Yes, Miss Johnson," he said, and he tried to make it sound patient, tolerant, but his voice had gone thin. "Do you have a question about the problem?" "No, Professor," Amara said, and she lowered her hand, and she turned to face the room, 500 people, the reporters, the cameras. "I don't have a question about the problem. I have a problem with the problem." The auditorium went silent. "Excuse me," Whitmore said. "This problem can't be solved," Amara said. "Not by Trevor, not by me, not by you, because it's built on an assumption that isn't true." The silence cracked into noise, students turning to each other, professors leaning forward. Trevor's chalk stopped moving. "That is an extraordinary claim," Whitmore said, and his voice had gone hard and dangerous, now the voice from the first day, "Get out before you embarrass yourself." "This problem is drawn from research I have published in the leading journals of this field for 10 years, peer-reviewed, cited hundreds of times, and you, a public participant, are telling this room that it is built on a falsehood." "Yes," Amara said simply. "Then you had better be prepared to prove it," Whitmore said, and there was a terrible confidence returning to him because surely she could not. "Because if you cannot, then this is not brilliance, Miss Johnson. This is slander. This is a desperate girl who knows she cannot solve the problem trying to burn the whole thing down rather than admit she is beaten. And everyone in this room can see it. It was a good attack. Amara felt it land in the room. She saw a few heads nod. Because it was the easier story to believe, wasn't it? Far easier to believe that a girl from a state school was making excuses than that a decade of Harvard research was wrong. "You're right," Amara said, and Whitmore blinked because he had not expected her to agree with anything. "That is exactly what it looks like. So I'm not going to ask you to believe me. I'm going to show you. Can I use the board?" Whitmore hesitated, and everyone saw him hesitate. And that hesitation cost him because a professor near the front, one of the honest ones, called out, "Let her show it, Richard. If she's wrong, it'll take her 30 seconds to be wrong." Trapped again. By the same logic she'd used on the first day. Let the numbers decide. "Fine," Whitmore said tightly. "Show us." Amara walked to the center board, the big one, and she began to write. And the room fell so silent you could hear the chalk. She started with the assumption in the corner. She copied it out plain and clear so everyone could see the thing itself. Then she began to build. She took the assumption and she pushed it gently at first through case after case, and for the first several cases it held. It worked. It did exactly what Whitmore's research said it would do, and Whitmore began to relax because look, it was holding the girl was going to fail after all. 12 minutes gone. And then Amara reached the edge case. She pushed the assumption to a place it had never been pushed before, a boundary so far out that no practical application had ever required going there, which was exactly why no one had ever noticed. And she carried it through step by step, slowly hiding nothing. And the room watched the mathematics unfold, and one by one, the sharpest minds in that auditorium began to see where it was going, and a low sound began to build a sound of collective disbelief because it was leading somewhere impossible. It was leading to a contradiction. The assumption pushed to its edge required a quantity to be both positive and negative at the same time, which cannot be, which is the mathematical equivalent of a wall falling down. And when a foundational assumption produces a contradiction, it means the assumption is false. And when the assumption is false, everything built on top of it, 10 years of it, hundreds of citations of it, comes down. Amara wrote the final line, the contradiction plain and undeniable in her small, careful handwriting, and then she set the chalk down gently the way her mother taught her, and she stepped back. The silence in that room was the loudest thing anyone had ever heard. Whitmore stared at the board. His mouth was open. His face had gone the color of ash. Because he was following it. He was following his own life's work, down to the contradiction at the bottom, and there was no error in her logic. There was nothing to attack. There was only the truth sitting there in chalk, telling him that the decade he had built his reputation on was standing on air. "That's," he said, "that's not. You've made an error somewhere. The edge case is not physical. It doesn't correspond to anything real. It's a mathematical curiosity. It doesn't invalidate the applied results. You've cherry-picked an irrelevant boundary." "It doesn't have to be physical," said a voice from the side of the stage. Dr. Evelyn Carter had risen from her chair. She had set the leather folder down, and she walked slowly to the board, and she read Amara's work from top to bottom in complete silence, while 500 people held their breath. "Richard," she said finally without turning around, "you know as well as I do that a mathematical assumption that produces a logical contradiction is false. It does not matter whether the edge case is physical. A single contradiction anywhere means the assumption cannot be universally true, and your papers state it as universally true, all of them." She turned to face him now. "She's right, and what's worse, Richard, is that I think somewhere you already knew. Because you never tested this boundary in 10 years. Did you?" Whitmore said nothing. "Did you?" Dr. Carter said louder. "There was no reason to test it," Whitmore said, and his voice was shaking now. "It has no practical relevance. No one would ever." "A 22-year-old public participant tested it," Dr. Carter said, "in 12 minutes the first time she ever saw your work, and you had 10 years. She let that sit in the room. 10 years, Richard. And the room began to come apart. Because the reporters were writing now fast. Because the professors were talking urgently to each other. Because Trevor Ashford was standing at his own board chalk, hanging from his fingers, staring at the contradiction, and everyone could see the exact moment the truth reached him, the truth that he had spent a week practicing a problem that could never have been solved, that Whitmore had handed him a rigged victory over a foundation that didn't exist, and that this girl, this charity case he'd smirked at an hour ago, had just seen in 12 minutes what his idol had missed in 10 years. But it was not over, because Richard Whitmore had one card left, and he played it, and it was the ugliest thing yet. "This is a setup," he said suddenly loudly, his voice cutting across the chaos. "This is a coordinated attack on my reputation. Evelyn Carter has never liked me. Everyone knows it, and now she's colluding with this outsider to humiliate me in public. How convenient that Dr. Carter just happens to be here, just happens to have this all prepared." He pointed at the leather folder on her empty chair. "What's in the folder? Evelyn been building a case, have you? Is this an academic competition or an ambush?" And for a moment, it worked. For a moment, the accusation hung in the air, and Amara saw doubt flicker across some of the faces in the room, because it was a story, a convenient story, the jealous rival and the outsider conspiring against the great man. And that was when Denise stepped forward from the back of the room. "He hired an investigator," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried because the room had gone silent to hear it. "Denise!" Whitmore turned, and for the first time all week, he looked truly afraid. "What are you?" "He hired a private investigator 4 days ago," Denise said, walking down the aisle now, her whole body shaking, but her voice steady. "To dig into that girl's past, to find something to disqualify her or embarrass her. I heard him say it through the wall. He said there's always something. He said find it." She reached the front of the room and turned to face the audience. "My name is Denise Walker. I have been Professor Whitmore's secretary for 11 years, and I have watched him rig this competition all week. He chose every problem to lock her out. He gave Trevor Ashford the semifinal problem 7 days ago, and when the mathematics still wouldn't beat her, he decided to destroy her life instead." Her voice broke. "And I'm done being quiet about it. I'm done." The auditorium exploded. Whitmore was shouting now over the noise that this was defamation, that Denise was a disgruntled employee, that he would have all their jobs. But no one was listening anymore because Dr. Carter had picked up the leather folder and opened it, and she was speaking to Professor Reyes and the other judges, and she was laying the pages out on the table, 5 days of records, dates, and times, and problem selections, and overheard words, and the judges were reading, and their faces were changing. And in the middle of all of it, Amara Johnson stood alone at the center board next to the contradiction she'd written, and she watched a decade of a man's lies come apart in real time, and she did not feel triumphant. She felt her mother's words in her chest. She thought of a young woman bending down to pick up a clipboard. And she thought, this is what it costs. This is what it always costs to make them finally look. Trevor Ashford walked over to her. His face was white. He stopped a few feet away, and he could not meet her eyes. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about the investigator. I swear I didn't know. I knew the problem was that I'd seen it early, and I told myself that was just how it worked, that I earned my spot, and you got lucky, and—" He stopped. He forced himself to look at her. "I said something to you this morning. No hard feelings. Like I was doing you a favor. And I've been standing over there for the last 20 minutes realizing I've never once in my life solved a problem the way you just did. Not once. Everything I know somebody handed me. And you." He shook his head. "You saw it in 12 minutes. The thing he couldn't see in 10 years. I'm not your competition. I never was. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, which is probably nothing. I'm sorry." Amara looked at him for a long moment. "It's worth something," she said. "It's not nothing to admit it. Most people never do." Professor Reyes stood up from the judge's table. His hands were full of Denise's pages, and his voice when he spoke was heavy. "I am suspending this competition," he said, "pending a full investigation. The evidence presented this morning it's serious. It's very serious. Problem selection, advanced disclosure to a contestant, and now allegations of intimidation tactics against another." He looked at Whitmore, and there was no deference left in his face, none of the respect that had protected the great man for 30 years. "Richard, you need to step down from the chairmanship of this competition, effective immediately, and you need to prepare to answer for a great deal." "You cannot do this," Whitmore said, but his voice had no power left in it. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what I have built?" "Yes," Dr. Carter said quietly. "We all know what you built, Richard. That's the problem. She just showed us it was built on nothing." And Richard Whitmore looked out at the room at 500 faces, at the reporters and the cameras and the judges holding the evidence of everything he'd done, and at the young woman standing next to the contradiction that had ended him, and he understood finally completely that it was over. He gathered what was left of himself, and he walked off the stage and out the side door, and the whole room watched him go in silence. And when the door closed behind him, it was Priya who started it. She stood up in the 4th row, and she began to clap alone at first. And then Denise joined her, and then Trevor, and then Professor Reyes, and then Dr. Carter, and then the whole auditorium was on its feet. 500 people applauding the girl in the second-hand jacket who had come here on a bus with $40 and had just in 6 days brought down a legend with nothing but the truth and a piece of chalk. Amara stood in the storm of it, and this time she did not feel small, and she did not feel afraid, and she did not feel the frozen lake. She felt her mother. She felt every rejection letter turned to paper in the wind. She felt the broken laptop that had taught her to see the whole board, and she felt rising in her chest something she had waited 22 years to feel. She had been seen, not because someone let her in, because she had made it impossible to look away. She found Dr. Carter's eyes across the stage, and the older woman who had spent 50 years in rooms like this one, who had been the first to look on the very first day, gave her a small nod. And in that nod was everything. A whole lineage of women who had bent down for clipboards and stood back up and read the numbers out loud. A door finally coming open. But Amara did not yet know what it had cost the others to open it. She did not know that Denise had just thrown away 11 years to say those words. She did not know that Dr. Carter had made an enemy she would carry for the rest of her career. She did not know that the investigation just beginning would drag every one of them through months of hearings and headlines and consequences none of them could yet imagine. She only knew in that moment, standing in the applause, that she had told the truth. And the truth at last had been enough. The applause had not even faded before Amara understood that winning had made everything more dangerous, not less. She felt it first in the way the reporters surged toward her microphones, out all shouting at once, and in the way Dr. Carter stepped in front of her like a shield and said firmly, "Miss Johnson will have no comment today. She has just done something remarkable, and she is going to be allowed to breathe." And she felt it in the way over Dr. Carter's shoulder she saw two men in suits at the back of the auditorium she had not seen before watching her, not clapping, writing something down. She did not know who they were, but she knew that look. It was the look of people deciding what to do about a problem, and the problem she understood with a cold drop in her stomach was her. Dr. Carter got her out through a side door, down a hallway into a small office, and she shut the door and turned the lock. "Sit," she said. "Breathe. You've had quite a morning." "Who were those men?" Amara said. "In the back, in the suits." Dr. Carter's face was careful. "University counsel. Lawyers." She sat down across from Amara. "Amara, I need you to understand something about what just happened out there. You didn't just win a competition. You didn't just expose one dishonest man. You exposed a decade of published research that this university's name is attached to. Research that brought in funding, grants, partnerships, prestige." She folded her hands. "There are people in this institution right now, people who have never met you and never will, whose only concern is damage control. And the cleanest, easiest form of damage control for some of them would be to make this whole thing your fault, to find some technicality, some rule you broke as a public participant, some reason to say the results are invalid, and the girl was never really qualified, and the less said the better." Amara felt the frozen lake, but this time it did not steady her. This time it just felt cold. "So it doesn't matter that I was right," she said quietly. "It never mattered that I was right." "No," Dr. Carter said. "Being right matters. It's the only reason we have a chance. But being right has never once in the entire history of the world been enough on its own. You have to be right, and you have to have proof, and you have to have people willing to stand next to you when the powerful decide to close ranks." She leaned forward. "You have the first two. I am here to make sure you have the third. But I need you to be honest with me now, completely honest, because they are going to come at you, and they are going to look for anything. Is there anything at all in your application, in your record, in your past, that they could use? Because if there is, I need to know before they do." Amara thought about it, really thought. And then she almost laughed. "Dr. Carter, I have nothing. That's the whole story of my life. I have a state school degree and a mother who cleans a hospital cafeteria and a bus ticket I bought with money I saved for 2 years. There's nothing to find because I never had anything to lose in the first place." She shook her head. "The investigator he hired, whatever he found, it's going to be a whole lot of nothing." And Dr. Carter looked at her for a long moment, and something in the older woman's eyes softened into something almost like grief. "That," she said, "may be the most powerful thing about you, and it may also be the thing that breaks my heart the most. Because you're right, there's nothing to find, and they're still going to look. They're going to take a young woman who did nothing but tell the truth, and they're going to turn her inside out, searching for a reason to make her the villain, just because it's easier than admitting the villain was one of their own." She stood. "Well, let them look. Let them find their whole lot of nothing, and when they do, we're going to make sure everyone sees exactly how hard they looked." But it was worse than either of them knew, because the investigator had found something, not about Amara, about her mother. Amara found out that evening back in the motel room when her phone rang, and it was not her mother's number, but a number she didn't recognize, and a woman's voice, brisk and professional, said, "Miss Johnson, I'm calling from the Office of University Communications. We wanted to give you a courtesy heads up before this appears in the press tomorrow. It's come to our attention that your mother, Monica Johnson, has a prior arrest record, a theft charge from 19 years ago. We felt you should be prepared for questions." Amara's whole body went cold. "My mother has never—" she started, And then she stopped because 19 years ago was before Amara could remember anything, and she realized she did not actually know she had never known, and the not knowing was its own kind of horror. "We're not making any judgments," the woman said smoothly. "We simply wanted you to be aware. There's some concern in certain quarters about the the narrative being built around your family, the inspiring struggle story. If there are complications to that story, it's better they come out in a managed way than—" "Then what?" Amara said. Her voice was shaking. "Then have people find out my mother is a real person who had a hard life. What exactly is the complication that she isn't a perfect enough poor person for you?" The woman on the phone was quiet. "I'm just trying to help you, Miss Johnson." "No, you're not," Amara said. "You're trying to scare me. You're trying to tell me that if I don't sit down and go away quietly, you're going to drag my mother's worst day through the newspapers to punish me for being right. That's what this call is. So let me tell you something." She was standing now, pacing the small room, and her voice was steadier than she felt. "Print it. Print whatever you want about my mother. Because whatever she did 19 years ago, she did it so that I could be exactly where I am right now. And if you think a 19-year-old arrest record is going to make people side with the Harvard professor who rigged a competition and hired a PI to destroy a 22-year-old, then you don't understand a single thing about the story you're standing in. Go ahead, print it, and watch what happens." She hung up. And then she sat down on the bed, and her hands were shaking so hard she could barely dial, and she called her mother. Monica answered on the first ring because Monica always answered on the first ring. "Baby, I saw somebody sent me a video. They're saying you—" "Oh my God, Amara, what happened today? The whole thing is—" "Mama," Amara said, "I have to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Something in her voice stopped her mother cold. "What is it?" Monica said quietly. 19 years ago, before I can remember. They're saying there was an arrest, a theft charge." Amara closed her eyes. "Mama, I don't care what the answer is. I need you to know that first. I don't care. I just need to know it from you and not from a newspaper." There was a long silence on the line. And then Amara heard her mother do something she had heard her do only a handful of times in her entire life. She heard her mother start to cry. "I was going to tell you," Monica said. "Someday, when you were older, when it wouldn't." She took a breath. "Baby, you were 3 years old, and it was winter, and I had lost my job at the plant, and the assistants had run out, and it was cold, and you had a fever, and I didn't have money for the medicine. And I stood in that drugstore holding a bottle of children's Tylenol and my last $4, and it cost $7, and I did not have 7, I had 4, and you were burning up in the stroller." Her voice broke completely. "And I put it in my coat. I stole a bottle of children's medicine for my sick baby. And they caught me at the door and they arrested me, and I spent a night in jail while a neighbor watched you. And it is the single worst night of my entire life, and I have carried the shame of it for 19 years. Amara was crying now too. "Mama, I never wanted you to know," Monica said, "because I was so ashamed. And I worked so hard every day since to make sure you never wanted for anything, never had to steal anything, never had to feel what I felt in that store. I built my whole life so that my daughter would never have to make the choice I made. And now they want to use it. They want to take the worst thing I ever did, the thing I did out of love for you, and use it to hurt you." She was sobbing. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." And Amara Johnson sat on the edge of a motel bed and made a decision that would change everything. "Don't you dare apologize," she said. "Don't you dare. Mama, listen to me. Listen, you stole medicine for your sick baby. That's not a scandal. That's not shame. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." She wiped her face hard. "And I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to let them leak it and spin it. I'm going to tell it myself, in my own words, because it's not their story. It's ours, and they will not take one more thing from us." The next morning, Amara did something no one at the university expected. She called the city reporter, the one who'd been at the semifinal, and she said, "You wanted a comment. I have one, but not about the competition, about my mother. Because I hear someone's about to tell you a story about her, and I'd rather you hear it from me." And she told it, all of it. The winter, the fever, the $4, the bottle of children's medicine, the night in jail, the 19 years of shame. She told it plainly without spin, without asking for sympathy. And at the end, she said one thing more. Somebody at this university, she said, found out that a 19-year-old mother once stole medicine for her sick child, and they thought that was a weapon they could use against me. I want you to sit with that. The most powerful university in the country, and a man who rigged a competition and hired a private investigator, and their big plan to protect themselves was to shame a cafeteria worker for the worst night of her life. That's who they are. That's who I'm up against. And I am not ashamed of my mother. I have never in my life been more proud of anyone. The story ran that afternoon, and it did the opposite of everything the university had hoped, because the people who read it did not see a scandal. They saw a mother. They saw themselves or their own mothers or the hard winters they'd survived. The story went out across the city and then across the state, and then it jumped the way some stories do onto the national feeds, and within 48 hours the whole country was talking about it. And not one single person outside the walls of Harvard was talking about it the way the university had wanted them to. They were talking about a girl who came on a bus with $40, who found in 12 minutes what a professor missed in 10 years, and whose mother had once gone to jail to buy her Tylenol. The two men in suits, the university lawyers, understood before anyone else that they had made a catastrophic mistake. You could not make Amara Johnson the villain now. The whole country had adopted her. Every attempt to discredit her would only pour gasoline on a fire that was already burning toward the university itself. So they changed strategy. And this was the twist Amara never saw coming. They decided to embrace her. 3 days after the story broke, Amara got a call from the office of the university president himself. And the voice on the phone was warm now, so warm, and it invited her to a meeting, and at that meeting, in a wood-paneled room with a view of the whole campus, the president of Harvard University sat across from a 22-year-old in a second-hand jacket and told her that the university deeply regretted what she had endured, that Professor Whitmore's conduct was being fully investigated, that his research was being formally retracted, and that the university would like to offer her, in recognition of her extraordinary gifts, a full scholarship, a place, a future, everything she had come here hoping for. And Amara sat in that room, and she looked at the man's kind face, and she understood exactly what was happening. "You want to give me a scholarship," she said slowly. "We want to welcome you into the Harvard community," the president said. "Where you belong." "Where I belong," Amara repeated. "That's interesting. Because 6 days ago, a security guard told me I belonged at the cleaning entrance, and a registration table said the word public like it was a disease, and a professor tried to throw me out of a room, and when I was right anyway, that same university hired a man to dig up my mother's arrest." She leaned back. "And now that the whole country is watching, and now that it would look very bad to do anything else, now I belong." The president's smile flickered. "Miss Johnson, I understand you've had a difficult experience, but surely you can see that we're trying to make it right." "You're trying to make it look right," Amara said. "Those aren't the same thing. If you gave me this scholarship out of a locked room where nobody could see, I might believe you meant it. But you're giving it to me in the exact moment when giving it to me solves your public relations problem. So forgive me if I don't feel welcomed. I feel used again, just in a nicer chair this time." The room was very quiet. "What is it you want?" the president said finally, and there was an honesty in the question that had not been there before. And Amara had thought about this. She had thought about it for 3 days. "I don't want your scholarship," she said. "Not for me. I've had offers from 4 other schools since the story broke, real ones from people who believed in me before it was convenient. I'm going to one of them." She saw the flash of alarm on his face, because a public rejection of Harvard was its own headline, and she pressed forward before he could recover. "But here's what I do want. I want the competition made truly public, really public, open to anyone from any school, any background, with real safeguards, so no professor can ever rig it again. I want the private seminars that Whitmore used to lock people out to be opened up, so the bottom half of the board is available to everybody, not just the students who come from the right families. And I want a scholarship fund, not named after me, named after nobody. Just a fund for kids, like I was kids with broken laptops in state schools, and no connections who are brilliant, and just need one door to not be locked." She looked at him steadily. You want to make it right? That's what right looks like. Not a chair for me, a door for the next one. The president looked at her for a long time. You could have taken the scholarship, he said. Most people would have. Most people didn't grow up watching their mother work double shifts so they could sit in this chair, Amara said. I'm not most people. You already know that. That's the whole reason we're in this room. And something shifted in the president's face, then something real, because he had spent his whole career around ambition, and he knew what it looked like, and this was not that. This was something he saw very rarely at his altitude. This was a person who genuinely could not be bought because she had decided a long time ago in a cold drugstore she couldn't remember that some things were not for sale. Let me think about it, he said. Take your time, Amara said. The story's already out. Whatever you decide, the whole country's going to find out what kind of university you run, so no pressure. She stood to leave, and at the door she turned back. For what it's worth, she said, my mother would have loved this office. She always wanted to see a view like this. She smiled a little. She just never got invited into the room. That's the thing you people never understood about her. She wasn't less than anyone in this building. She just never got invited into the room. And she left. The investigation into Whitmore, meanwhile, was uncovering things far worse than a single rigged competition. Because once Denise's records opened the door, other people started coming forward. A junior faculty member whose research Whitmore had quietly buried because she wouldn't defer to him. A graduate student he'd pushed out of the program for questioning his methods. 3 former students from years past who had suspected the competitions were rigged and had said nothing because who would believe them against him? The dam broke, and it turned out that Richard Whitmore had been doing to people quietly in the dark for 30 years exactly what he had tried to do to Amara in the light. And Denise, who had thrown away 11 years to speak up, found that she had not destroyed her life after all, because Dr. Carter had made sure the whole story of the secretary who refused to stay silent was part of the public record. And within a week, Denise had 3 job offers from people who wanted more than anything an employee with that kind of spine. Her 16-year-old daughter told her, "Mom, everyone at school knows what you did. They think you're a hero." And Denise cried because she had spent 11 years believing that keeping her head down was the only way to protect her children. And it turned out that the day she finally lifted her head was the day her daughter became proudest of her. Trevor Ashford did something no one expected to. He went to the investigation voluntarily, and he told them everything. That he'd been given the problem early, that he'd known on some level that his whole path had been paved for him, that he'd looked down on people who hadn't had what he had and called them charity cases, and never once questioned why the road was so smooth for him and so blocked for everyone else. It cost him. His name was in the reports. His reputation took the hit. But he did it anyway, and afterward he found Amara, and he asked her awkwardly if she would ever be willing to just sometimes show him how she did it, how she saw the whole board. And Amara, who could have said no, who had every right to say no, looked at him and saw a young man actually trying to become something better than he'd been raised to be. "Yeah," she said, "I'll show you. It starts with reading it 3 times. And Whitmore. Richard Whitmore lost everything. The chairmanship, the competition, the research retracted from every journal that had published it, and finally, after the investigation concluded, his position at the university itself. 30 years of authority gone, not because a rival brought him down, not because of a conspiracy, but because a 22-year-old public participant read a problem 3 times and told the truth about what she saw. The last time Amara saw him was by accident in a hallway weeks later. He was carrying a box of his things. He looked smaller than he had on the stage. He saw her and he stopped, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "You must be very pleased with yourself," he said finally. But there was no venom left in it, just exhaustion. "No," Amara said, and she meant it. "I'm not pleased. A lot of people got hurt. Denise almost lost everything. My mother's worst night is in 100 newspapers. And you." She looked at him. "You spent your whole life believing brilliance had a certain face, and you were so sure you stopped checking your own work, and it cost you everything." She shook her head slowly. "There's nothing to be pleased about in that. It's just sad. It's just a sad, sad waste." Whitmore stared at her, and for one moment, One single moment, something moved behind his eyes, something that might in another man, in another life, have become an apology. But it didn't. He wasn't capable of it. He just shifted the box in his arms and nodded once stiffly and walked away down the hall and out of her life, a small man carrying the last of himself in a cardboard box. And Amara watched him go, and she did not feel triumph and she did not feel pity exactly. She felt something quieter and harder to name. She felt the door that had been locked her whole life, the one every rejection letter had slammed, the one the security guard had pointed away from, the one that a whole system had spent 22 years convincing her she was not allowed to open. She had turned the handle, and it had never, it turned out, been locked at all. 3 months later, Amara Johnson stood in front of a classroom full of children in the exact neighborhood where she had grown up, and she almost didn't go through with it. She stood outside this door of the community center, the same community center where she had once done her homework at a folding table because the apartment was too small and too loud, and she felt her hands shake. Because it was one thing to face down a Harvard professor in front of 500 strangers. It was another thing entirely to walk into a room full of kids from your own block, kids who knew exactly where you came from, and try to tell them that the impossible thing you did was something they could do too. Strangers you could impress. But these children would know if you were lying to them. They had heard promises before. They had learned, most of them, not to believe them. Her mother stood beside her. Monica Johnson had quit the hospital cafeteria 6 weeks earlier, not because Amara had told her to, but because for the first time in 22 years, she had been able to. Amara had taken a portion of a book advance, a real book advance from a publisher who had come calling after the story broke, and she had done with it the only thing she had ever wanted to do with money. She had told her mother to stop working double shifts, and Monica had cried and refused and argued, and finally let herself rest. And now she stood next to her daughter outside a classroom, and she took Amara's shaking hand. "You're scared," Monica said. "What if I get in there and I can't? What if I tell them they can do anything, and they can see right through me? These kids aren't stupid, Mama. They know the deck's stacked. They live it. I don't want to stand up there and sell them a lie." Monica squeezed her hand. "Then don't sell them a lie," she said. "Tell them the truth. The truth is the only thing you've ever been good at, baby. The truth is what got you here. So walk in there and don't tell them they can do anything. That's a lie, and you're right, they'll know it. Tell them what really happened. Tell them the door was locked for you, too. Tell them you got knocked down and lied about and laughed at, and that it hurt, and that it's still hard, and that you did it anyway. That's not a lie. That's just true. And true is the only thing that ever changed anybody." Amara looked at her mother. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been this wise," Monica said. "You just finally got old enough to hear it." And Amara laughed and wiped her eyes and opened the door. The kids went quiet when she walked in. There were maybe 30 of them, ages 8 to 14, sitting in mismatched chairs, and they looked at her with the guarded, evaluating expressions of children who have already learned that adults come to neighborhoods like theirs to take pictures and make speeches and then leave. Amara knew that look. She had worn it herself at their age. She didn't stand at the front. She pulled a chair around and sat down among them at their level. "My name's Amara," she said. "I grew up about 4 blocks from here. I used to do my homework at that table right over there, the one with the wobbly leg. Anybody still use that table?" A few hands went up tentative. "It still wobble." "Yeah," a boy said. "You gotta put something under it." "A folded-up worksheet," Amara said. "Fold it 4 times, wedge it under the short leg. I invented that. You're welcome." A ripple of laughter. The guarded expressions loosened just slightly. "So I'm not going to stand up here and give you a speech," Amara said, "because I've heard a lot of speeches in this room, and I never believed a single one of them. So I'm just going to tell you what actually happened to me, the real version, not the version in the newspapers." She leaned forward. "You want to know what really happened at Harvard?" They did. She could feel it. 30 kids leaning in. "A security guard tried to send me to the cleaning entrance," she said. "The first thing that happened to me at the most famous university in the world was a man looked at my jacket and my backpack and decided I must be there to mop the floors." She let that sit. How many of you have had somebody look at you and decide who you were before you opened your mouth? Slowly, almost every hand in the room went up, and some of the kids looked at each other surprised because they had each thought it was only them. "Yeah," Amara said softly. "Me too. My whole life. And I'm going to tell you something nobody told me. Something I had to figure out the hard way, standing in that building, feeling like I didn't belong." She looked around at every face. "They're going to keep doing that. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you they'll stop. The security guards and the registration tables and the professors, they're going to keep looking at you and deciding. That part doesn't change just because you're smart. That part might never change." A few of the kids nodded because they already knew this, and they respected that she wasn't pretending otherwise. But here's the part they never want you to know. The deciding they do about you, it's not about you. It never was. It's about them. It's about what they're too scared or too lazy or too comfortable to see. And the numbers don't care what they decided. The truth doesn't care. When I stood at that board, it didn't matter what that professor thought I was. The math was the math, and the math was on my side, because the math doesn't check your jacket. A girl in the back, maybe 12, with sharp, watchful eyes, raised her hand. "But you're special," the girl said. It wasn't rude, it was almost sad. "You're like a genius. That's why it worked for you. It's not going to work for regular people." And Amara felt the whole room agree with the girl. Felt the old belief settle over them, the one the world had taught them, the one that said, the exception proves you're all still stuck. "What's your name?" Amara asked. "Keisha." "Keisha, can I tell you a secret? You want to know why I was able to see things at that board that Harvard students couldn't see?" Amara reached into her bag and she pulled out an old laptop. The screen was cracked the top third of the display, dark and dead. She set it on the table where all of them could see it. "This is the laptop I learned on. My mom got it out of a church donation bin when I was 13, and half the screen was broken, see? So when I watched free lectures online, I could only see the top part of the board. Every time a professor started a proof and it went below this line," she drew her finger across the dead part of the screen, "it just disappeared. I couldn't see how it ended." The kids were staring at the broken laptop. "So you know what I had to do every single time I had to finish the proof myself, in my head, before I could scroll up and check if I was right. For years, because I couldn't see the bottom of the board." She looked at Keisha. "The Harvard kids, they had perfect screens. They saw the whole board every time. Somebody always showed them the answer, so they never learned to find it themselves. And I never had a choice. I had to build the whole thing from nothing over and over for years because I was too poor to have a screen that worked." She tapped the broken laptop. "This is why I beat them, Keisha. Not despite the broken laptop, because of it. The thing that was supposed to hold me back is the exact thing that made me able to see what they couldn't." The room was completely silent now. "I'm not special," Amara said. "I'm not a genius who was born different. I'm a girl who never got handed the answers, so I learned to find them. And every single one of you in this room is learning to find things every day that comfortable kids never have to find. You're figuring out how to get by on nothing, how to read a room, how to survive things that would break the kids with the perfect screens. You are building skills right now that they will never have because they never needed them, and the world's going to tell you those skills are worth nothing." She shook her head slowly. "The world is wrong. Those are the skills that let me look a Harvard professor in the eye and tell him he was wrong. Those are the exact skills." Keisha's eyes were wet. She wiped them quick the way kids do when they don't want to be seen crying. "So how do we—" She started and stopped and tried again. "What do we do?" And this was the moment Amara had come for. The whole reason. "You learn," she said. "And you don't wait for permission. That's the trap, Keisha. That's the thing they get us with. They convince us the door is locked, so we stop even trying the handle. We stand outside our whole lives waiting for someone to unlock it, and nobody ever does." She stood up now. "But here's what I found out. Here's the thing I'd get on a bus and cross the whole country to tell you. Most of the time, the door was never locked. They just told us it was. They just told us over and over in 100 small ways, you're not allowed, you don't belong, this isn't for you, until we believed it so deep we never even reached for the handle." Her voice was strong now, filling the room. The security guard, the registration table, the professor, they all told me the door was locked. And you know what I finally did? I put my hand on the handle and I turned it and it opened. It was never locked. It was never ever locked. And then Amara told them the last part, the part she had planned as a surprise. I didn't just come here to talk, she said. I came here to open a door. Starting this fall, there's a program. Free. Real. Not a photo op that disappears in a month. Actual mathematicians, actual mentors, actual laptops that work for kids from neighborhoods exactly like this one. It's already funded. It's already real. And it's not named after me, and it's not named after anybody because it doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to whoever walks through the door. She looked around the room. And I fought a whole university to make it happen. So don't any of you dare tell me you're going to waste it. The room erupted, kids talking over each other, hands shooting up with questions, and in the middle of it, Keisha pushed through the noise and walked straight up to Amara and threw her arms around her. Hard, the fierce, desperate hug of a child who has just been handed the one thing she was afraid to hope for, and Amara held her, and over the girl's shoulder, she saw her mother standing by the door, with her hand pressed to her mouth, crying, and Amara thought this is what winning was for. Not the stage, not the applause, this. She stayed for 3 hours. She answered every question. She sat with Keisha and showed her how to read a problem 3 times. And when it was finally over and the kids had gone home buzzing, Amara and her mother walked out into the evening together. "You did good, baby," Monica said. "You did so good." I almost didn't go in. But you did. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. The people who change the world aren't the ones who aren't scared. They're the ones who are scared and go in anyway. Monica took her daughter's arm. "You know who taught me that? A little girl who used to count the change in my purse, who watched me come home so tired I could barely stand and never once complained and just kept knocking on doors that kept getting slammed. You taught me to keep knocking, Amara, long before I ever taught you." They walked in silence for a while, and then Monica said quietly, "Can I tell you something I never told you about that night, in the drugstore?" Amara slowed. "You don't have to, Mama. I want to, because I finally can." Monica took a breath. "That night in the jail cell after they took me in for stealing your medicine, I sat on that cold bench and I thought my life was over. I thought, I'm a criminal now. I've got a record, I'll never get a good job. My daughter's going to grow up with a mother who's got an arrest on her record. I've ruined everything." Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. "And then I thought about you home with the neighbor still sick, and I thought, but she got the medicine. She's going to be okay. Whatever this costs me, she got the medicine. And I made myself a promise on that bench, Amara. I promised that I would spend the rest of my life making sure that the worst night of my life bought you the best life I could give you, that it wouldn't be for nothing." She stopped walking and turned to face her daughter. "And baby, standing in that classroom today, watching you hand those children a door I never got. That's it. That's the promise kept. That's the worst night of my life, finally paid off in full." And Amara Johnson stood on a sidewalk 4 blocks from where she grew up, and she held her mother, the woman who had gone to jail for a bottle of children's Tylenol, the woman who had worked double shifts for 22 years, the woman who had taught her that the door was never locked, and the two of them cried together in the fading light, and it was not sad crying. It was the other kind, the kind that comes when something that was owed for a very long time is finally paid. The years that followed were not a fairy tale. Amara would have been the first to tell you that. She went to the university that had believed in her before it was convenient, and it was hard, and there were still rooms where people looked at her jacket first and her mind second, and there were still nights she sat with a problem until 3 in the morning wanting to give up. The world did not transform because one girl told the truth at one board on one morning. That is not how the world works, and Amara never pretended it was. But some things did change. The competition she'd fought for became genuinely open, and within a few years, a kid from a reservation in New Mexico won it, and then a kid from a housing project in Detroit. And the faces at that board slowly began to look like the whole country, instead of just one narrow corner of it. The private seminars got opened up the bottom half of the board, made available to anyone who wanted to learn. And it turned out that when you stopped hoarding the answers, brilliance showed up from places nobody had thought to look. And the scholarship fund, the one named after, nobody grew and put working laptops into the hands of hundreds of kids who had been learning on broken screens. And some of those kids did extraordinary things, and every single one of them was one more proof that talent had never been rare. Only opportunity had been rare. That was the lie at the center of everything, the lie that Richard Whitmore had built his life on and that Amara Johnson had spent 12 minutes destroying. They had all been told that brilliance was scarce, that it lived in certain families and certain schools and certain kinds of people, and it was never true. Brilliance was everywhere. It was in every neighborhood and every folding table and every kid doing homework by a wobbly leg. It had always been everywhere. It had just been locked out. Keisha. The girl with the sharp, watchful eyes went through the program, and she was, it turned out, ferociously gifted. And 8 years later, she stood at a board of her own in a competition that was now truly open to anyone. And she solved a problem that stumped the entire room. And when a reporter asked her afterward how she had learned to think like that, she said, "There was a woman who came to my neighborhood when I was 12. She showed me a broken laptop, and she told me the door was never locked." And Amara, watching from the audience, cried the way her mother had once cried in a doorway. And Monica Johnson lived to see all of it. She lived to see her daughter become the mentor she herself had needed and never had. She lived to see the neighborhood kids call her Miss Monica and bring her their report cards. She lived to see the worst night of her life become the cornerstone of the best thing she had ever done, which was raise a girl who refused to stop knocking. And when people asked her in her later years if she was proud of her daughter, the famous mathematician, she always corrected them. "I'm not proud of her because she's famous," she would say. "I'm proud of her because she went back." Anybody can climb out of a hard place. It takes a special kind of person to climb out and then turn around and reach their hand back down and pull the next one up. That's my Amara. She reached her hand back down. Years later, when Amara Johnson had become someone the whole country knew, a young reporter asked her the question everyone always asked. What was the secret? How did a girl with nothing beat a system built to keep her out? And they expected her to say something about genius or hard work or luck. Amara thought about it for a long moment. She thought about a security guard's hand on her shoulder. She thought about a professor's cruel laugh rolling across 500 people. She thought about a broken laptop and a bottle of stolen children's medicine and a cold jail cell and a promise made on a bench. She thought about the exact moment she raised her hand in the back of that auditorium, terrified, certain, alone. And then she gave the only answer that was ever true. "They spent my whole life telling me the door was locked," she said, "and I believed them. For 22 years I believed them. And then one day I got tired enough and angry enough and I put my hand on the handle anyway, expecting it to be locked, ready for it to be locked." She looked directly into the camera. And it opened. It just opened. It was never locked at all. It never had been. The only lock was the one they'd convinced me was there. And the day I stopped believing them, the day I reached for the handle anyway, everything changed. She paused. So if you're out there standing in front of a door, somebody told you that you're not allowed to open. If you've spent your whole life believing you don't belong on the other side of it. Her voice was quiet and steady and absolutely certain. Reach for the handle anyway. Turn it. I promise you, with everything I am, more often than they will ever admit that door was never locked. And the moment you find the courage to open it, everything changes. And Amara Johnson turned the handle, and she walked through, and she held the door open behind her for every single one who came next.